Men forced to eat the flesh of their deceased friends to survive, gas chambers reserved for the disabled, human skulls preserved as trophies. World War II was one of the darkest and most extreme moments in history. Never before had such a mix of euphoria, terror, and anguish been experienced in a wartime conflict. The devastation that swept through Europe left thousands of remarkable anecdotes, some incredibly cruel and others curious. Today, in this new episode of Military History, we will show you 6 things that were relatively normal during World War II. Are you ready? Then, get ready to travel back in time. In the 1930s, the American film industry was experiencing one of its golden eras. Hollywood was entering its golden age, and one of the studios that benefited the most from this period was Disney. Its characters were known throughout the American population, seen in comic strips, advertising posters, and movies. When World War II broke out, the United States government asked the company to use its cartoons for the war effort. To do so, Walt Disney designed dozens of short films featuring his characters fighting against the fascists as a form of propaganda aimed at the youth. Thus, a child could be comfortably at home, idly watching television when suddenly they would see Donald Duck parachuting from an airplane, ready to fight the Japanese. These images served to remind civilians who the enemy was and why they were fighting. Even if a person was not physically present on the battlefield, the intense government propaganda machine forced them to be aware of the major events. Furthermore, various units of the United States Army requested Disney patches and insignias featuring their cartoons. In this way, the troops' uniforms bore images of characters like Pluto, Bugs Bunny, Porky Pig, and Goofy in determined and defiant poses, ready to destroy fascism. Interestingly, the only character from the studio that was never used to decorate military emblems was Bambi. This may be because the deer appeared to be a less threatening image when facing the Nazis. It is well known that cruelty was the cornerstone of National Socialist ideology. However, Hitler's movement distinguished itself from other dictatorships by crossing all established boundaries. A clear example of this was the infant euthanasia program launched in Germany in the spring of 1939. The goal of this abhorrent plan was to eliminate lives that, according to Nazism, had no value, specifically, disabled individuals seen as genetic setbacks and an economic burden to the state. Thus, the Ministry of the Interior of the Third Reich issued a decree that obligated doctors to report newborns with physical deformities or signs of mental deficiency. These infants were transferred to clinics specifically designed to kill them, much like cattle. Once there, they were never seen again. They were administered lethal overdoses of medication or denied food for days until, weakened and abandoned, they died of starvation. Initially, the murder was reserved for babies, but over time, the operation expanded to include young people up to 17 years old. It is estimated that around 10,000 children perished as a result of this program. However, this was just the beginning of the barbarity. In the fall of 1939, Hitler signed a decree authorizing the Tiergartenstrasse for Initiative, or more briefly, T4. With it, the euthanasia program was expanded to include adults, and gas chambers were created to poison the victims. Despite all of this being carried out clandestinely, the concealment of tens of thousands of deaths eventually became an impossible task. The mass murder of the disabled became an open secret that sparked major protests, although all of them were harshly suppressed by the authorities. On December 7, 1941, the Imperial Japanese Navy launched a surprise attack on the United States naval base at Pearl Harbor. The attack resulted in the deaths of over 2,400 civilians and military personnel and the destruction of a total of 188 aircraft. The event was seen by the American population as an act of cowardice committed by savages who did not understand the basic rules of war. Uncle Sam was eager for revenge, and for this reason, the Americans entered the war. The media and government propaganda dehumanized the Japanese, referring to them with epithets such as rats, scum, or yellow parasites. When Americans came face to face with the Japanese, they behaved as if they were hunting dangerous animals. After killing a Japanese soldier on the battlefield, the soldier who had killed him would approach the corpse with the macabre intention of taking a trophy. The coveted prize was none other than a piece of the enemy's body, with the most sought-after parts being teeth, ears, and skulls. However, keeping the enemy's head required time and effort because, first, they had to cut the tendons and muscles covering the neck. Once the upper limb was detached, they had to remove the flesh from the bone structure, leaving only the bone visible. It was a dirty and tedious procedure capable of turning even the bravest stomachs. Japanese skulls were preserved as relics, demonstrating that an American soldier had fought against imperial troops and had proven their worth by killing an enemy and taking a part of their body. Some went so far as to give these unique trophies to their family members and even their girlfriends. On September 8, 1941, in the context of the German invasion of the Soviet Union, Hitler gave an immediate order. Nazi forces were to surround the city of Leningrad and besiege it until its inhabitants died of starvation. For the Führer, it was only a matter of time before snow, 40 degrees below zero temperatures, lack of food, absence of medicine, and low morale took their toll on the Russians. Thus began one of the most brutal sieges in history, which would last for 872 days. Each of those days was a hell for the Soviet population, with death lurking around every corner, and surviving a full day became a miracle. In Leningrad, the military in charge of the defense organized food rationing because German bombs had destroyed the grain, meat, and large storage facilities. Each person received half a kilogram of bread per day, but a month after the siege began, the amount was reduced to 300 grams per day. When winter arrived, and the situation became critical, animals from the zoo were sacrificed for food. This was followed by the same fate for domestic animals and pets. However, hunger knew no end because the German siege remained unbroken. The most desperate resorted to an unpleasant jelly made from crushed leather belts and shoes and wallpaper paste. Others fermented sawdust to make a soup that supposedly had a high caloric content. Meanwhile, Soviet scientists embarked on a race against time to extract vitamins from pine needles, which were abundant in Leningrad. None of it worked, and some even resorted to making flour from mollusk shells, which they then tried to use for baking bread. It is estimated that during the siege, the average Russian consumed only 10% of the calories necessary for survival. In this context, thousands of people resorted to one of humanity's greatest taboos, cannibalism. The Soviet police arrested 2,105 people accused of consuming human flesh. The accused were divided into two categories. On one hand, there were the corpse eaters, those who had acted like scavengers and searched for lifeless bodies in the streets or semi-abandoned buildings to cook them. On the other hand, there were the people eaters, whose crime was even worse, as they had killed other humans and then consumed them. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of this story is that only 2% of those arrested had criminal records. This means that almost all of the cannibals were ordinary people whom no one would have suspected of such a crime. Driven by hunger and desperation, they believed that this was the only way to survive. We've reached the end of the video. Leave your comments in the box below, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to learn about many more military events that have left their mark on history.